For more than 500 years, the story of America's discovery has been told by one named Columbus. But what if the real architect of the journey wasn't Christopher, but a mysterious figure named Geo Colombo? Today we'll solve a historical problem that has been buried on purpose. Who was Geo Colombo, and why does history hide him? Imagine discovering that one of history's greatest stories, how the Western world reached America, may have been built on a hidden identity. Today's journey will pull back the curtain on a man whose name echoes through the shadows of old archives, lost maps, and political secrets. This is the hidden life of Geo Colombo, the man some believe was the true mastermind behind the so-called discovery of America. To understand the mystery behind America's so-called discovery, we must first understand the man whose name quietly appears in forgotten maritime logs, obscure letters, and dusty archival references, Geo Colombo. And the moment you try to trace him, you realize something strange. This is not a man who lived in the spotlight like many explorers of his era. This is someone who moved through history like a shadow, leaving behind just enough evidence to prove he existed, but never enough to reveal who he truly was. And that gap, that silence, is exactly where the mystery begins. Geo Colombo's identity is already a puzzle from the moment you attempt to define it. In a time when lineage, birthplace, and titles were everything, Colombo stands out as someone with almost no verifiable origin. Some historians place his roots in Genoa, yet other records place someone with his name in Portugal years before Columbus ever arrived there. The more you follow his trail, the more it splinters. It's almost like there were 2 or even 3 men using the name Colombo, or perhaps one man intentionally moving through different circles under different identities. And each path feels just believable enough to be real. Imagine a man who understands the political tension of Europe, the rising importance of new sea routes, and the value of silence. A man who learned early that knowledge, especially nautical knowledge, could be more dangerous than any weapon. Such a man would not want his name carved into monuments or celebrated in royal courts. Instead, he would operate quietly, strategically, using his skills only where they mattered most. And every trail we follow hints that Geo Colombo was exactly that type of man. Many early maritime documents from the mid-1400s mention a Colombo who traveled between ports in Genoa, Madeira, and Lisbon. Some records describe him as a navigator, others as a cartographer, and a few suggest he had ties to private maritime guilds groups that guarded sea knowledge like state secrets. What is striking is that he appears in places and moments where major decisions were being made. When Portugal was expanding its Atlantic reach, when Genoese merchant families were investing in Western voyages, when Spanish courts were seeking intelligence on new sea routes. Wherever there is movement, exploration, or competition, Colombo is nearby, quietly involved but never fully revealed. And that raises a question. How does a man with such influence remain practically invisible in the grand story of exploration? One possibility is that Geo Colombo was never meant to be a public figure. Perhaps he operated as an advisor, a strategist, or even a maritime intelligence agent. At that time, kingdoms were desperate for any advantage maps, currents, rumors of unknown islands. Powers like Portugal and Spain would have relied on men who could move between nations unnoticed, gathering and passing crucial information. And Colombo fits that mold perfectly. He is present at key moments, yet never central in the records. Always in the scene, but always blurred. Some historians suggest that Geo Colombo's life might have crossed paths with the man we know as Christopher Columbus long before 1492. Others speculate that Colombo's story was deliberately absorbed, replaced, or overshadowed to simplify the narrative of discovery. Still others argue that Colombo himself may have been testing routes, gathering intelligence, or guiding expeditions that hinted at lands to the west years before the world would officially acknowledge their existence. And each clue, each fragment, pulls us deeper into a version of history far more complex than we were taught. So when we ask, who was Geo Colombo? The answer is not simple. He was a navigator, a traveler, perhaps even a spy. He was a man whose knowledge placed him dangerously close to the great powers of his age. A man who shows up in the shadows of world-changing events only to disappear just before the spotlight arrives. A man whose story suggests that the discovery of the New World may have involved more secrets, more hidden figures, and more silent players than we ever imagined. To understand why Geo Colombo's life feels like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, we first have to look at the way history was recorded in the 15th century. Everything that mattered, titles, voyages, royal favors, was written down, stamped, archived, and preserved. Important figures were documented with almost obsessive detail. Yet when we look for Geo Colombo, someone who clearly moved among explorers, merchants, and even royal courts, we find only fragments, not full biographies, not clean timelines, just scattered references, contradictions, and sudden disappearances. And this isn't just oversight, it feels intentional, like someone, somewhere, wanted his story to be hard to follow. The first sign that something is off comes from the strange gaps in his records. There are documents showing a Colombo advising Portuguese sailors in the 1470s, but then he vanishes for years at a time. He reappears in Genoa or Madeira or Lisbon, but always under circumstances that raise more questions than answers. The problem is not that there isn't information, it's that the information doesn't connect. One version of him is a skilled navigator, another is a cartographer, another is a diplomat-like figure interacting with court officials. It's almost as if he is constantly shifting roles, and each identity appears only briefly before dissolving again. And that pattern show up, influence something important, vanish suggests a man who wasn't meant to be visible. Someone working behind the scenes whose presence mattered more in secret rooms than in public history. In an age when kingdoms fought fiercely for maritime dominance, certain individuals were kept off the books to protect strategies and secrets. If Geo Colombo was one of those men, his hidden life makes perfect sense. The less the world knew about him, the safer he was, and the more useful he became to the powers he served. But it goes deeper. There are letters from Spanish officials referencing a Colombo long before Columbus appears in Spanish lands. There are maritime logs that list a Colombo preparing ships or giving route information regarding faintly rumored Western islands. Yet none of these documents explain who he was, why he was involved, or what his connection was to the major expeditions that followed. His name surfaces in conversations about voyages that supposedly hadn't happened yet. His knowledge of Atlantic winds, currents, and islands seems far more advanced than it should have been for someone largely absent from historical credit. This is where things become uncomfortable. Because if Geo Colombo possessed knowledge that predated the so-called discovery of America, then acknowledging him would unravel the official version of events. It could imply that certain European powers knew more than they admitted. It could suggest prior voyages that were hidden for political reasons. It could even indicate that the heroic narrative built around Christopher Columbus was shaped to emphasize one man and erase the contributions of someone whose background or allegiance wasn't convenient for the ruling powers of the time. Geo Colombo's hidden life may also be tied to his origins, which remain suspiciously unclear. If his background conflicted with the image a nation wanted for its heroic discoverer, erasing him would be the simplest solution. Records could be absorbed into other names. Achievements could be reassigned. Mentions could be lost, ignored, or attributed to someone more publicly acceptable. And when we look at how quickly Columbus rose in status after 1492, it becomes easy to imagine how political leaders would want a clean, simple story, one brave explorer, one defining moment, rather than a tangled network of navigators whose origins and loyalties raised questions. Every surviving clue points to the same conclusion: Geo Colombo wasn't forgotten by accident. His life didn't fade because of time. The fragments we have left look more like the remains of a story that was deliberately trimmed, reshaped, or pushed aside to make room for a legend that served political ambitions. When you try to uncover where Geo Colombo actually came from, you step into a maze of claims, contradictions, and stories that refuse to line up. Origins are supposed to be the simplest part of any historical figure's biography. Birthplace, family name, early life, these are the foundations. But with Geo Colombo, nothing is simple. In fact, his origins are so tangled that they feel more like a deliberate smokescreen than genuine confusion. Every time you think you've found a starting point, the trail splits, doubles back, or dissolves into something stranger than before. Most traditional historians insist he was Genoese, born somewhere within the bustling merchant world of medieval Genoa. And that sounds believable. Genoa, at the time, was a hub for traders, sailors, and navigators who shaped the maritime world. But the deeper you dig, the less stable this claim becomes. The documents that supposedly place him there are vague, inconsistent, and often contradict each other. They mention a Colombo, yes, but which Colombo? Was it Geo, his relatives, or someone entirely unrelated? The name itself was common enough to muddy the waters. And what's even more suspicious is how records in Genoa seem to overlap with other records in Portugal in ways that challenge the idea of a single man living a normal, traceable life. Portugal, in fact, complicates everything. There are logs and letters from Portuguese ports that mention a Colombo. Years before Christopher Columbus ever arrived there, these documents describe a navigator or advisor whose maritime knowledge seemed well beyond what a typical Genoese woolworker or merchant's son would have. How could a man supposedly rooted in Genoa be working in Portugal during years when, according to other accounts, he was elsewhere entirely? Either the timeline is wrong, the man had a double life, or we're dealing with more than one identity feeding into the same name. And this is exactly where researchers begin to suspect that Geo Colombo was not simply from one place. He was deliberately obscured by movement, secrecy, or by a crafted identity that served political goals. Then there are the more unusual theories that place Colombo in Spain long before his official arrival. Some archives hint that he had connections to certain Spanish noble families, and that he may have spent years under a protected status, quietly providing maritime intelligence. If those accounts are true, it raises an unsettling question. Why would Spain hide his presence until later? What was he doing there that required silence? And why do these references disappear just as quickly as they appear, as if someone later attempted to sweep them out of the public narrative? But perhaps the most intriguing claim is the one that suggests Geo Colombo's origins may not have been tied to any common Italian or Portuguese family at all. Some historians argue he may have come from a background that was politically inconvenient, perhaps even from a lineage that would have made his rise in European courts controversial or unacceptable. If this is the case, inventing or altering his origins would have been the easiest solution. Change his birthplace, adjust his identity, present him as someone who belonged to a more politically useful narrative. And once a new identity is created, the old one can fade into the shadows, preserved only in scattered references that modern researchers now scramble to decode. Even old maritime guilds complicate the story further. Certain guilds were known for taking in outsiders, sailors with no official family background, individuals fleeing political enemies, or navigators who needed to disappear behind new names. These guilds kept their members' histories secret, allowing them to operate under fresh identities. If Geo Colombo belonged to one of these networks, then the inconsistencies in his origins are not mistakes, they're intentional layers of protection. Every clue surrounding his birthplace, his family, and his early life seems carefully shielded, as if the truth of who he really was would unravel more than just his own story. His origins aren't missing because history forgot them. They were missing because someone made sure they would never be fully known. If there is one part of Geo Colombo's life that pushes the story from unusual into unmistakably suspicious, it's his ties to secret networks and missions that were never officially recorded. When historians examine the scattered traces of his life, they find him surfacing in places and moments where crucial decisions were being made, yet always without a clear role or reason. It's as if he was a man who stood at the doorways of history, quietly influencing events without ever stepping fully into the light. And the more these patterns repeat, the more it becomes clear that Geo Colombo was not just a traveler or navigator, he was someone operating in the shadows, someone who appeared exactly where powerful kingdoms needed an invisible hand. In the 15th century, maritime knowledge was as precious as gold. Trade routes, ocean currents, uncharted islands, these were the secrets that could shift global power. And the men who possessed this knowledge were valuable, but also dangerous. They were monitored, recruited, or quietly removed if they knew too much. Which brings us to the curious fact that Geo Colombo had access to information that a normal sailor or merchant would never touch. Records hint at him sharing details about Atlantic winds, advising on potential western routes, and even assisting with map revisions that extended far beyond Europe's officially known world. But how did he gain this level of insight? Who gave it to him? And why is his name attached to meetings that should have been restricted to elite maritime strategists? This is where the notion of secret networks comes into play. Across Portugal, Genoa, and Spain, underground maritime brotherhoods operated behind the scenes. These groups included skilled navigators, mathematicians, mapmakers, and even spies. They worked outside official channels, exchanging information in hidden gatherings, protecting discoveries from rival kingdoms, and sometimes planning voyages that were never meant to be recorded. These networks were the engines behind Europe's race to dominate the seas, and they needed operatives who could move between nations without drawing attention. Geo Colombo fits this role with uncanny precision. He appears in guild registries without origin. He receives payments without explanation. He advises captains without status. Everything he does resembles the work of someone plugged into a hidden system. Some historians believe he worked as a maritime intelligence courier, moving sensitive information between Portugal and Spain during periods when these two nations were locked in fierce competition. Such couriers were trained to blend in, to appear as simple sailors or traders while carrying critical data about ship designs, ocean currents, or rumored western islands. If Colombo was one of these agents, then his vanishing act suddenly makes sense. Disappear in Genoa, reappear in Lisbon, show up in Madeira, vanish again for years. These movements weren't accidents, they were missions. Even more intriguing are the accounts suggesting that Colombo had ties to politically motivated shadow groups that sought to control the narrative around new discoveries. These groups existed because whichever nation reached the New World first would reshape the global order. Maintaining secrecy was essential. If Geo Colombo conducted scouting missions or gathered intelligence on unknown territories, none of it would have been documented publicly. Such missions were hidden behind financial shadows, coded payments, unmarked shipments, silent departures in the night. And sometimes the only evidence left behind is a scribbled note, a signature or a name that appears in a ledger and then never again. There are fragmented letters between royal advisors that mention a Colombo, whose knowledge of Western waters seemed impossible for someone who had never officially sailed there. There are Spanish port records listing supplies ordered by a man who should not have existed in Spain at the time. There are Portuguese documents describing a mysterious cartographer who arrived with unfamiliar maps and then vanished once his job was done. None of these pieces tell a full story on their own. But together, they paint the outline of a man who operated on the borders of secrecy, someone trusted with information too sensitive for the public eye. His involvement with shadow networks becomes even more apparent when you look at the competing interests of the time. Portugal was guarding its Atlantic discoveries with ferocity. Spain was desperately seeking a route that could rival Portugal's success. Genoa was investing in explorers who could open new trade lines, and the men who moved between these worlds were rare. Even rarer were the ones who moved silently. Geo Colombo had the knowledge, the access, and the ability to appear where no one expected him. That is not the life of an ordinary navigator. It is the life of someone running missions whose details were never meant to survive in official history. The moment we step into the debate about who truly set the stage for the discovery of the Americas, the story of Geo Colombo becomes even more unsettling. This debate isn't just a matter of arguing timelines or comparing voyage logs. It's about challenging a narrative that has been protected, polished, and repeated for centuries. And the deeper we explore, the more we begin to see that the celebrated voyage of 1492 may not have been the beginning at all. Instead, it might have been the final act of a much older, hidden effort, one in which Geo Colombo played a silent but decisive role. A role that, for reasons still unclear, was later buried under the fame of Christopher Columbus. To understand this debate, we have to look at the evidence that docen T fit the official story evidence that suggests Geo Colombo had knowledge that no ordinary mariner should have had. There are accounts placing him in discussions about Western routes years before Columbus supposedly came up with the idea. There are logs showing Colombo preparing or advising on voyages that hint at land beyond the Atlantic long before 1492. There are letters describing a man with advanced understanding of wains, currents, and islands that hadn't been discovered yet. It is these clues that force us to ask a difficult question. Where did he get this information? This is where many historians begin to suspect that the discovery of the New World was not an isolated stroke of genius, but the culmination of secret missions and exploratory attempts that were never publicly acknowledged. And if Geo Colombo knew about lands to the west before the world officially recognized them, then he wasn't merely a navigator, he was a pioneer whose findings may have laid the groundwork for Columbus's later journey. That possibility alone threatens the traditional narrative, because it shifts the credit from the man celebrated on statues and holidays to someone barely mentioned in textbooks. But the debate grows even more intense when we examine theories suggesting that Geo Colombo might not have been a separate figure at all. Some researchers argue that the name Geo Colombo was an earlier identity, possibly a concealed or private one used by the man who later emerged as Christopher Columbus. According to this theory, Columbus didn't create a new identity when he entered the Spanish court. He abandoned an old one. A politically risky name or a background that made it impossible for him to gain patronage could have forced him to adopt a new persona. If that is true, then the hidden life of Geo Colombo is not a forgotten story. It's the missing layer of the Columbus narrative that was intentionally removed to protect his rise. Yet another side of the debate insists that Geo Colombo and Christopher Columbus were two distinct individuals, but that Columbus's success may have relied heavily on Colombo's intelligence, maps, or covert guidance. Imagine a strategist who never appears in public, a hidden architect whose knowledge was passed on to a more presentable figure. In this version, Geo Colombo becomes the unseen engineer of the journey, the man who supplied the possibility long before the hero was chosen to execute it. And if this was the case, erasing him from the story would benefit many royal courts, political factions, and even Columbus himself. The strongest fuel for the debate comes from inconsistencies in Columbus's own claims. He insisted he had no advanced maps, no secret knowledge, no predecessors. But the way he navigated, the confidence he had in Western land, and his insistence that he was right before he had any proof makes many scholars doubt his story. That kind of certainty usually comes from intelligence, not intuition. And all signs point to someone supplying that intelligence long before 1492, someone who understood the Atlantic deeply, someone like Geo Colombo. As the debate continues, one thing becomes clear. History is rarely as clean as the stories we're taught. Behind every hero, there are unnamed contributors. Behind every legend, there are erased figures. And when the official narrative is too perfect, too simple, too polished, it usually means there's a hidden truth waiting beneath it. When we reach the question of why Geo Colombo disappeared from the grand narrative of exploration, we begin to understand the uncomfortable truth about how history is shaped. History is not just a record of events, it is a selection, a refinement, a version of the past that powerful people decide is worth preserving. And when we look at the fragments of Geo Colombo's life, the scattered traces of his involvement in maritime strategy, and the suspicious overlaps with the official story of America's discovery, it becomes clear that his absence from the history books is not an accident. It feels like a decision, a removal, something done slowly, quietly, and with purpose. To understand what was erased, we must first understand what was at stake. In the 15th century, Europe was racing toward global dominance. Nations like Spain and Portugal were desperate for control of new trade routes that would offer wealth, power, and influence on a scale never seen before. In this high-stakes struggle, the narrative of discovery became more than just a story. It became a tool, a symbol of national pride used to justify territorial claims and political agendas, and a tool like that required a clean, heroic figure at its center. One name, one legend. No confusion, no complexity, no shared credit, But Geo Colombo complicates that story. His presence hints at earlier voyages, secret knowledge, and the involvement of networks that operated far outside the royal spotlight. If his contributions were acknowledged, the neat myth of Columbus as a lone visionary collapses. Suddenly, Spain's great national hero is no longer a singular genius, but a man who might have relied on hidden architects, unauthorized maps, or intelligence from someone whose identity was a political liability. A truth like that would weaken the narrative that empires built their claims upon. So instead of rewriting the legend, they simply removed the inconvenient elements. Erasing a man from history doesn't require burning documents or silencing witnesses. It can be done quietly. A name omitted from official records. A contribution attributed to someone more acceptable. A letter rewritten or filed under another identity. A story retold with sharper edges and fewer characters. Over time, the truth fades, not because it disappears, but because it becomes harder to see. And Colombo's story is filled with these shadows, these absences that feel deliberate rather than accidental. There are letters, for instance, where Colombo is mentioned in connection with maritime intelligence, but later, copies of the same letters replace the name or obscure it. There are financial records that show payments to someone involved in preparing voyages, but the identity of the recipient becomes harder to trace as years pass. There are logs that reference him indirectly, like an echo of someone who was once essential, but whose presence is suddenly too controversial to acknowledge. Each of these traces suggests that someone wanted his role minimized, blurred, forgotten. The political climate of the time only strengthens this suspicion. Spain needed a hero who fit the image of a loyal servant of the crown. Portugal wanted to protect its maritime secrets by hiding anyone who might reveal too much. Genoa hoped to claim credit by connecting their homeland to the man who changed the world. In this tangled web of ambitions, a figure like Geo Colombo, whose origins were uncertain, whose loyalties were complex, and whose knowledge was dangerously ahead of its time, was a liability. He didn't fit the clean narrative any kingdom wanted. So step by step, his story was reduced. Hidden behind the identity of someone more useful. Overshadowed by the myth that the world now accepts as truth. But the most revealing proof of erasure comes from the inconsistencies in Columbus's own biography. Gaps in his timeline, sudden leaps in knowledge. Skills that should have taken decades to acquire but are never fully explained. These empty spaces look remarkably like places where another man's experiences were absorbed, repackaged, and reassigned. And when the pieces are laid side by side, they create a silhouette not just of a missing figure, but of a man whose absence is louder than his presence ever was. As we piece together the fragments of Geo Colombo's life, a picture emerges that challenges everything we thought we knew about the discovery of the Americas. He was not a man seeking fame or statues, but a navigator, strategist, and possibly a covert operative whose knowledge and influence shaped events from the shadows. His origins, movements, and connections reveal a life deliberately obscured, a story that powerful nations may have had every reason to erase. The official tale of Columbus as the lone discoverer begins to falter when we consider the evidence of secret networks, hidden missions, and intelligence quietly guiding the path across the Atlantic. Whether Geo Colombo was a precursor, a mentor, or even the man behind, Columbus's identity, the traces he left behind, suggest that the true history of America's discovery is far more complex, layered, and intriguing than the simplified legend we've been taught. By exploring his hidden life, we confront the uncomfortable truth that history is not always written by those who acted, but by those whose stories were convenient to preserve. Geo Colombo may have been erased from the pages, but the shadows of his contributions still ripple through the maps, letters, and voyages of the age. His story reminds us that behind every celebrated figure, there are untold lives, hidden architects, and mysteries waiting to be uncovered, and sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones history tried hardest to hide.